competition going to look like? Because we've heard you up at the podium, we've heard you throughout. You're not handing this job over to Shedeur Sanders. It certainly doesn't sound like. What's this competition looking like?
Well, I don't think you can. I don't think there's enough of a sample size recently with any of our candidates to be our starting quarterback, be it Dylan, Deshaun, or Shedeur, that you can say that's our starter. You just can't.
We don't have to make that decision anytime soon. I think any player that we have in that room, we would expect to compete to earn a role. Those two would be no different.
Fireable offense. That is a fireable offense. I want to know how much longer the owner's going to watch this crap, because the fans have had it. We deserve better.
The Cleveland Browns just handed their new head coach one of the messiest quarterback situations in the entire NFL. A $46 million salary obligation, an $80 million cap hit in 2026. A dead cap number so catastrophic, $131 million, that even saying that out loud feels illegal. And then, sitting quietly in the corner of that same quarterback room, a fifth-round rookie who already has a fan base that rides harder for him than most franchise quarterbacks ever dreamed of. Shedeur Sanders. The name alone generates more conversation than anything else happening in Cleveland right now. And Todd Monken, the brand new head coach, fresh off running one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL with Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, just walked into the scouting combine in Indianapolis and essentially told Shedeur Sanders and the entire city of Cleveland that nothing is guaranteed. Not the starting job, not the future, not anything. The message was calm, it was measured, but make no mistake, it was loud.
Well, I don't think you can. I don't think there's enough of a sample size recently with any of our candidates to be our starting quarterback, be it Dylan, Deshaun, or Shedeur, that you can say,
you just can't. 3 words, and just like that, every Browns fan who spent the last few months convincing themselves that Shedeur Sanders was going to walk into Cleveland and immediately take over, every single one of them felt that. This wasn't a coach trying to motivate his young quarterback through tough love. This was a coach drawing a line in the sand. He's been in this league long enough to know that handing a job to anyone, especially a rookie fifth-round pick who arrived somewhere he never wanted to be without making them earn it, is a recipe for disaster. Monken isn't in the business of giving away starting jobs. He's in the business of winning football games. And that's precisely what makes this situation so fascinating and so uncomfortable for Browns fans at the same time. Here's what people are missing in this whole conversation. Todd Monken isn't just talking about Shedeur when he says open competition. He's talking about Deshaun Watson, a quarterback who hasn't been genuinely good at football in 6 years. A quarterback whose most recent highlight, and Monken actually brought this up himself, was a win against the Ravens in 2023 before getting hurt. Monken mentioned Watson's best recent game in what felt like an almost desperate attempt to find something positive to say about the situation. He talked about Watson at one time playing at an elite level. He talked about not losing that part of playmaking ability.
Where he's at now, it's hard to say. Probably his best game he played in recent memory was 23 at Baltimore.
Right.
He won the game and then got hurt.
Yeah.
So obviously being able to keep him healthy and on the field, I don't think you lose that part of playmaking ability.
That's the defense you're running for your starting quarterback in 2026. His best game was 3 years ago, before he got hurt. And yet, because of that $131 million dead cap number, Deshaun Watson is still in the building, still in the conversation, still somehow in the mix. The Browns willingly put these financial handcuffs on themselves. Nobody forced them into this contract, and now the new head coach, who had nothing to do with that decision, has to stand at a podium in Indianapolis and talk about Deshaun Watson like he's a legitimate starting quarterback option. That's the reality Monken inherited, and rather than run from it, he's leaning into it. But here's where it gets really complicated, because what Monken is doing, intentionally or not, is treating Shedeur Sanders like a normal quarterback fighting for a roster spot. And the problem is, Shedeur Sanders is anything but normal in terms of public profile and fan base passion. Cleveland beat reporter Mary Kay Cabot, who's covered this team for decades, put it about as plainly as anyone could when she noted that Todd Monken has been talking glowingly about Deshaun Watson's traits every single time a microphone gets in front of him. Meanwhile, Watson's signage has been torn down from the stadium. The fan base has moved on. And yet, the head coach is out here talking about elite-level play from a quarterback who hasn't looked elite since the Obama administration. Cabot's read on it?
Monken, he's waited for this chance for a very, very long time. He's 60 years old, and he's going to put the best QB out there to can actually help run his offense and help him look good and help the Cleveland Browns win games. And he's probably putting the blinders on and forgetting about all of that other stuff and just thinking purely ball.
Thinking purely ball. That's the most generous interpretation. But even if you take Monken completely at his word, even if this is purely a football decision with no financial pressure behind it, you still have to ask, does anyone in the NFL honestly believe that Deshaun Watson is going to beat out Shedeur Sanders in a fair competition? And that's the contradiction sitting at the center of all of this. The Browns are saying open competition, while almost everyone watching from the outside can see the math doesn't add up. They're not going to cut Watson because the dead cap number is apocalyptic. They're not going to bench him on day one because then what was the point of keeping him? And they're not going to hand Shedeur the job outright because apparently that's not how Monken operates. So what are they actually doing? Some people think it's a chess move. Keep Watson in the room, use him as a measuring stick, force Shedeur to compete and fight and prove himself, rather than walking in expecting a red carpet. That theory makes some sense. You don't want your young quarterback getting complacent. You don't want to build him up so much before a single practice rep that he arrives with the wrong mentality. Competition builds toughness. Competition reveals character. But here's the flip side of that argument, and it's a brutal one. If you lose Shedeur in this process, if you break his confidence, if you mismanage him and he ends up somewhere else and becomes great, Cleveland will never forgive themselves. Because what Monken and the Browns organization don't seem to be fully accounting for is just how culturally significant Shedeur Sanders already is. This isn't a quiet fifth-round pick hoping to catch a break. This is a name that generates genuine national conversation. The analyst community has already pointed out that Shedeur Sanders, just 1 year in, has proven himself worthy of being a top 64 quarterback in the league, meaning he deserves to be a starter or legitimate backup on any roster in the NFL. For a fifth-round pick in year one, that's not nothing. That's actually remarkable. And the fan base heat around Shedeur is very real. One analyst made the point that even in Atlanta, a city that has nothing to do with Cleveland, when former Browns OC Kevin Stefanski was hired there, the immediate public reaction wasn't about his coaching record. It wasn't about his Super Bowl credentials. It was about how people felt he had treated Shedeur Sanders. That's the level of emotional investment we're talking about. That's how deep this runs. The Browns can talk about open competition all they want, but the moment they put Deshaun Watson on the field week 1 of the 2026 season over Shedeur, they better be ready for what comes next, because that reaction won't be measured, it won't be polite, and it won't stay inside the city limits of Cleveland. Now here's where Todd Monken actually makes his most compelling case, and credit where it's due, because this man clearly knows football. In his interview at the Combine, Monken talked about his offensive philosophy, the idea that there is no single system that fits every quarterback, that your job as a coach is to build the system around the players you have. He used his experience with Lamar Jackson in Baltimore as proof of concept, completely reimagining what an NFL offense could look like by designing around Lamar's specific strengths instead of forcing Lamar to fit a predetermined mold.
I would just say that one size doesn't fit all. There's not one system that fits any given quarterback, and it's your job to make it fit for the quarterback that you have. That's your job. You can't just say, well, he doesn't fit our system. Well, then you've got a shitty system.
That's the right philosophy. That's the right mentality. And if Monken genuinely applies that to Shedeur, builds something around Shedeur's mobility, his improvisation, his playmaking instincts, then maybe this works out. Maybe the open competition narrative is just a short-term communication strategy, and behind closed doors, everyone already knows where this is heading. But right now, it doesn't feel that way. Right now, it feels like Cleveland is trapped between a financial nightmare and a cultural phenomenon, with a new head coach trying to navigate both without tipping his hand. The reality is this: Shedeur Sanders did not ask to be in Cleveland. He made that clear. He ended up there anyway. And now he has to walk into a building where the head coach is publicly telling anyone who will listen that the job isn't his yet, while simultaneously praising the man who is only still on the roster because cutting him would break the franchise financially. That's not a competition, that's a power dynamic dressed up in competitor language. And somewhere in Cleveland, Shedeur Sanders is watching all of this, processing it, deciding what kind of player he wants to be, what kind of competitor he is, and whether he's going to let this situation define him or whether he's going to define the situation. Because here's the truth that nobody in that organization wants to say out loud. The Browns don't need to pick a starting quarterback right now. They need Shedeur Sanders to be so undeniably, unquestionably good this offseason and through training camp that the decision makes itself. They need him to walk into that competition and make it no competition at all. That's what Todd Monken is actually asking for. He just couldn't say it directly. And whether Shedeur Sanders answers that call, that's the whole story of the Cleveland Browns 2026 season, right there, before a single snap has been played.